Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded. Just like every week, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about themes of psychology, behavioral health, emotional health, as these topics manifest themselves from the gospel reading for the week. Just like always, this isn't intended to be a substitute for spiritual direction or counseling, but we know that the spiritual world and the psychological world so often cross paths or go hand in hand in the course of life. Now, I've been doing this each week since the end of November, and every week it's been very clear when I've read the gospel in advance what it was that I wanted to talk about. A theme related to psychology or behavioral health or human functioning just sort of popped out at me. That was not the case for me this week. I've read the gospel over several times and nothing just immediately grabbed me as it relates to psychology, behavioral health, emotional well-being. So maybe I missed something. And if I did, please hop on the comments section and say, hey, you missed an opportunity here, or I would have taken it this way. I'd be really interested to know if you have thoughts that are different from mine. But we're continuing the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark, and today we get to the end of it. And I want to focus on that last line where after the leper is cleansed and he goes and manifests what the Lord has done for him, even though the Lord asked him not to, Jesus' fame spreads, and it's such that he can't go anywhere openly, the gospel says. And so he remains in deserted places. He remains away from the public's eye for a bit. Really interesting. And how I wanted to relate it to psychological terms and human functioning, human behavior, is to talk about our personality. There's a famous psychologist in this country named G. Stanley Hall. He's actually the first ever American to receive a doctorate in psychology in this country. He got it from Harvard. And he had a Christian upbringing, and he wrote a very lengthy book on the psychology of Jesus. Now, I'll be honest, I have not read it because it's long. It uses some very challenging language, typical of scriptural writing, psychology writing at that time. But what's interesting is that he highlights that he's sort of a pioneer talking about Jesus in terms of psychology. But he notes that Jesus, like anybody else, had a personality and had personality tendencies just like you would or I would. So what are our personality tendencies? If you were to go to a psychologist and they were to give you a personality test, what is it exactly that they are looking for? There are 5 big domains of personality that get zeroed in on, and those themes are extroversion versus introversion, openness to new experiences versus a resistance to that, agreeableness is another one. Then there's conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is very important. And then neuroticism. And we'll talk a little bit about what exactly neuroticism means. But this theme of extroversion versus introversion, this is what I wanted to highlight as it relates to today's gospel. So bottom line for G. Stanley Hall was that Jesus had a personality, and his personality would have fallen more on the lines of extroversion than introversion. For example, one of the subscales in measuring extroversion is warmth, affectionate and friendly, willing to form attachments to other people. Definitely sounds like a personality trait that Jesus would have had. Positive emotions is another subdomain. So a tendency to experience emotions such as happiness, joy, love, excitement. Extroversion versus introversion. And yet today in this gospel, Jesus is withdrawing. He's going to deserted places. And the Gospels several times speak of Jesus retreating, going in prayer, seeking solitude in order to have that connection with the Father. But today, it's as though Jesus is withdrawing because of what this cleansed leper did, which was to publicize this matter of his being healed from leprosy miraculously. So Jesus' fame grew, his popularity grew, that he wasn't able to go anywhere openly now because of the news spreading about what he had done. So was the Lord having to resist some of this natural, almost perhaps, inclination he had towards extroversion? Maybe. But introversion versus extroversion, really interesting to think about. And where would have the Lord been? And where are you? More introverted versus more extroverted? Let's talk about this next domain, openness to new experiences. Some people are very open, willing to participate in new things, try new things, think about new ideas from different perspectives, or think on ideas with a different angle. Some people are more hesitant to do some of those things. Perhaps they're more conventional in behavior, prefer familiarity to something new or novel. Perhaps they find change difficult or stick to something that has been tried and true. So openness to new experiences versus not. Agreeableness. This is another one of those personality factors. Somebody who scores high in agreeableness is going to tend to be straightforward, very frank, sincere. They may have active concern for others, showing interest in them, showing generosity, this sort of thing. Moved by the needs of others, as opposed to somebody who scores low on agreeableness, may be less engaged with other people. It says here they're typically more disagreeable or antagonistic, egocentric perhaps, or skeptical of others' intentions. So where do we fall in this domain? More agreeable, less agreeable? With any of these personality factors, nobody is completely introverted or extroverted. Nobody is completely agreeable or disagreeable. Nobody is completely on one side or the other. We fall on a spectrum, and depending on what's going on in life, we may have to fluctuate back and forth a little bit. Conscientiousness. This one is actually a huge predictor of a lot of things in life, how successful you're going to be, how well you're going to relate to others. Somebody who scores high in conscientiousness is going to typically feel well prepared to deal with life. They're probably going to be orderly, perhaps neat and tidy, organized. They have a sense of duty, self-discipline, versus somebody who scores low on this domain. Perhaps they'll have a lower opinion of themselves and their abilities. They may procrastinate in their tasks. Perhaps they're hasty or speak or act without considering the consequences. And then neuroticism. This is the last of the big 5 personality factors. I don't really love that word neuroticism, but what it's speaking of is if you score high in this, it may be that you have issues being anxious about some things. Perhaps you're a little bit hostile. You may feel more prone to having guilt, sadness, feeling lonely. There may be more of an inclination towards feeling vulnerable. Whereas if you score low in neuroticism, perhaps you'll be easygoing, slow to anger, calm and relaxed, find it easier to resist temptation, or you have a high tolerance for frustration. So I bring all this up because who has a personality? You do, I do, Jesus did, everybody does. Everybody has a personality, and it's going to look different for everybody. And maybe it'll shift a little bit to the left or right on these different domains throughout the course of life. But for the most part, by the time we're in early adulthood, our personality is going to be pretty consistent. And what I just ask you to consider today is what your personality is. How is that going to work with the people around you who may have different scores on these personality factors? So like if I were to take a personality test and it were to say, yep, I am high in agreeableness, high in conscientiousness, sort of mid-range in neuroticism, sort of mid-range in extroversion. That's all great. My personality is my personality. It is what it is. How is that going to work when I have to be in close proximity with somebody else who may be high in neuroticism, who may be even higher than me in agreeableness, who may be completely extroverted or more extroverted? How am I going to get along with that person? How am I going to be able to work with that person? Again, I hope this isn't a huge stretch, but the Lord in today's gospel pulls back, withdraws, goes to these deserted places. Perhaps he was more comfortable in other situations. Sometimes in life, we may have to temper or restrain elements of our personality. It's different with the Lord, of course, than it is with us. But we have to be conscientious of who we are as a person, how our personality is, how we work given our personality, and how we work with others and how others work with us, how we get along as members of the human family, as a combined set of persons trying to work together. So it's really fascinating stuff, important to think about, useful to consider. Again, this is the world that I'm steeped in every day as a psychologist, but you are too, because you have a personality, and so does everybody that you encounter every day. Knowing about it, understanding it, knowing how it works and manifests to others is only going to benefit you. So here's hoping that next week's gospel will be a little easier to think about in terms of behavioral health and psychology. Be that as it may, I hope you found this helpful, and I'll talk to you next time. Again, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Take care.